Hi, I'm Mike from Catholic Treehouse, and I wanted to talk to you for a few minutes about why I'm putting the Saint Challenge together. The Saint Challenge came about because I'm a history buff. And when I read fascinating stories, I want to tell others about them because I think they're fascinating stories. And stories about the saints, well, they're all fascinating stories. You see, when you read these stories, very few saints were born saints. There are some who were drawn to a life of piety from the age of 3, but they, by and large, are the exception. Most of the time, these are just ordinary people, but they're saints because they lived extraordinary Christian lives. That doesn't mean they were always Christians. Many of them were pagans until their conversion, and their Christian life was only a few months or a few weeks long, or in some cases only a few days long, before they were martyred. So I'm reading these stories of saints who lived in godless societies or run by pagan governments. And I'm reading the news and looking around. And I start to compare and contrast their time and our time. And I ask myself, are we living in a mostly Christian society today or a mostly post-Christian society? Is our government at every level run by primarily God-fearing Christians? Or are the God-fearing Christians who are in public office or who are running for public office attacked and maligned for standing up for their faith by their political opponents who mock their practice of faith? Well, I'll tell you what I see when I look around and I ask those questions. I see a society that is increasingly comprised of ex-Christians who don't practice any religion anymore, the so-called nuns. And the data backs up this view. A Pew survey last month shows that at our current rate, within 50 years, self-identifying Christians will make up only half of society, at best. So where does a post-Christian society run by a post-Christian government leave us as Christians? Well, if you compare our present-day society with the days the saints lived in, as a history buff, I'll tell you where that leaves us. We're not heading toward a time of religious persecution. We are in the beginning stages of it. I mean, when we live in a day and age where Catholic churches can be firebombed and vandalized, when the holy sacrifice of the Mass can be interrupted by protesters, when Catholic Supreme Court justices can have their lives and the lives of their families threatened, and when rather than investigate these incidents and prosecute the perpetrators, our government instead sends SWAT teams to arrest people in their homes whose so-called crime is to courageously go outside abortion clinics and not firebomb and not vandalize, but to pray. Well, if this isn't a time of religious persecution, then I don't know what to call it. So what does this have to do with why I started the Saint Challenge? I'll tell you. The only way we can make it through these times and the times that lie ahead, the only way we can reclaim our society for Jesus Christ, the only way forward is to look to the people who have done it in the past, the saints. If we want to join them in the church triumphant, we have to step up how we live as Catholic Christians in the church militant. We need to be the beacon of hope. We need to be the agents of change in our society. Because our society needs to change. Our society needs a new generation of saints to save us from ourselves. Society needs us. Society needs you. That's why I started the Saint Challenge. You see, we've spent decades making movies where we wind up rooting for the bad guy who does bad things. The Tony Soprano, the Walter White, the Godfather. And where does that leave us? Where does that leave us as a society? It leaves us in a place where, okay, here's an example. Only a few weeks ago, someone about a mile from where we live was shot and killed one night over a parking place outside their apartment. A parking place. That's where the anti-heroes have left our society. Angry and bitter and godless. Saints are the antidote to the anti-hero. We need to be like them. As Catholic Christians, we need to claim and baptize our society for Jesus Christ. That's the heart of the Great Commission, right? But because we are facing stiffening opposition, we need the strength and the courage to stand up to being persecuted for doing so. We need to follow the examples of the saints. We need to be inspired by them in how to live our faith. Now, one word of clarification. Will completing the Saint Challenge automatically make you a saint? No. Will diligently checking all the boxes automatically get you to heaven? No. This church teaches definitively that you cannot earn your way into heaven by your works. That is a heresy known as Pelagianism. The church teaches in the Catechism that salvation, quote, comes from the grace of God, the free and undeserved help that God gives us, end quote. But the church also teaches that we can't sit back and do nothing either. In the Catechism, it also says, quote, God's free initiative demands man's free response, end quote. That means we have to go and do good works. St. James reminds us in his epistle that faith without works is dead. The Saint Challenge is about living our faith. Because, let me tell you, our society needs it. So that's the story behind the Saint Challenge. That's why I felt motivated to do this. And if you're listening to this, thank you. Thank you for answering the call. Brothers and sisters in Christ, we have our work cut out for us. Let's get to it. Together, let's be saints.